I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and runs away. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. The hired hand runs away because a hired hand does not care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. And I lay my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd. For this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it up again. I have received this command from my Father. The Gospel of our Lord. Let's see, I don't see any little ones with us today. Okay. The fourth Sunday of Easter is also known as Good Shepherd Sunday. It is a Sunday in which every year we hear Jesus call himself the Good Shepherd, and we read the 23rd Psalm. I think that we have this romanticized image that drives this Sunday. You likely know this picture or a variant of it. It's the blonde hair, blue-eyed Jesus carrying the pretty snow-white lamb across his shoulders. And it is a lovely image, but I can't help but wonder if, like with the nativity scenes on Christmas, we've over-sanitized this image and this metaphor that Jesus uses to talk about himself. If I had to guess, we've moved into this lovely image because, well, even among American shepherds today, the task of shepherding looks different. I love this time of year in Williamsburg because it's lamb season. And I love going down to Colonial Williamsburg and seeing the lambs. And by the way, there are so many lambs this year. It's pretty awesome. I learned this year that these in particular are special lambs. And maybe those of you who have lived here longer than me already know this. But they are the breed that would have been found here in colonial times, the Leicester Longwood sheep. The Leicester Longwood sheep died out in the U.S. by 1920, and then they were retransplanted back into this country by way of Australia in 1990. The sheep of CW are part of a rare breeds program seeking to preserve this and other rare animal breeds. So in addition to being super cute, their presence in CW is pretty incredible. As this is my third lamb season in Williamsburg, I've noticed a few things. The sheep are pretty spread out, just a handful in each pen. And I see the wonderful caretakers that feed them, shear them, care for them, but they come and go. There's no one really standing watch per se, except the curious visitors just wanting to see the lambs being lambs. And all of that because we've greatly reduced, if not nearly eliminated, the natural threats to those lambs. The lambs do their own thing in their pens, and they graze in relative safety. Because that's how we tend to experience sheep. I wonder if we translate that to how Jesus is talking about himself. We see it as a peaceful and romantic image like Colonial Williamsburg on a nice spring day. Like Jesus is the one who frolics in the fields with us. You may have already guessed this, but I'm going to push back a little bit against the Colonial Williamsburg Jesus. And not because there's anything inherently wrong with it, but because the metaphor is so much more than that. It is so much deeper than that. So often sermons on Good Shepherd Sunday focus on us as sheep, which is important. Those are good sermons as well, especially in a culture and society where we've somehow started calling people sheeple as an insult. We're all sheeple, y'all. We're following a particular shepherd, but we are sheep nonetheless. But for today, I want to keep the focus today on Jesus and what he is telling us about himself. Shepherding in the ancient world was largely a different experience. Yes, the sheep still come with all the dirt and the stink we know from them today. They still need to be fed, they need to have water, all of those basic necessities are the same, but it looks quite different. And the shepherd has much more than a caretaking role. On one hand, the shepherd is a leader taking the sheep from one place to another for grazing and for water. He leads them in the wilderness through the places of danger to find the basic necessities of life. He leads me beside still waters, waters that are safe to drink from. He leads them to safe places for grazing, and he leads them back to their pen. And the shepherd is also a protector. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The rod in particular was used to protect the sheep from predators. The shepherd would put themselves between the threat and the sheep and beat the threat back. The love and the care the shepherd has for the sheep extends to risking one's own life for the sake of the flock. And there's no end to the love and the care that the shepherd has for the sheep. Not in a romantic, oh, isn't that sweet kind of way, but in a risking death kind of way. As I reflect on this metaphor, a few things stick out to me, and I'm only going to touch on two of them in this sermon. But first, Jesus is oriented toward the wilderness, and Jesus is found there. This God that we meet in Jesus is willing to stick it out with us in the wildernesses of the world and the wildernesses of our lives, leading us on right paths. Isn't that the God that we meet again and again and again throughout the scriptures, the one who sticks it out and dwells with us even when we're separated from the communities and the religious spaces that we know and love? I've leaned into a particular phrase during this pandemic, and perhaps you have too, where two or three are gathered. We're gathered in this online space, even if we're physically apart. And please don't get me wrong, I am so excited that we'll be trying an outdoor service in May, again, provided all of those metrics continue to be met. Gathering in person is important for the life of a community. It brings connection with the wider community of faith and connections in different ways with Jesus and with God. But I think the point about that phrase is about those times when we can't. Because the reality of human history is that there are times for one reason or another that we can't be in the sanctuary or a place of worship. And Jesus, the Good Shepherd, goes with us through those wildernesses too. The exiles of the Hebrew Bible went 70 years without their temple, and about 50 to 60 years in exile, separated from their larger community. Early Christians met in small groups in houses, and I think the phrase intends to tell us that Jesus and our God are not tied to a building, but Jesus is let loose in the wilderness, and we can trust that Jesus is there even if it is just two of us together. Jesus, as the Good Shepherd, reminds us that the absence of a building cannot stop Jesus. Jesus is not just in our sanctuary, but in our homes, in our online spaces, in our phone calls to one another, in our wildernesses, whatever they may be, and in the random encounters on the street and in the grocery store. Yesterday, I picked up Chinese food at Tops China down on John Tyler in that shopping center there. I had one of my "This Pastor Loves You" masks on. Another woman was picking up as well, and she noticed my mask, and we began talking. She's a member at New Zion Baptist Church, so we talked about church, about faith, about our mutual admiration of Pastor Whitehead. In that encounter, Jesus was there, even as we were talking about the wildernesses that the pandemic has brought us to. And that's the promise of the Jesus that leads the sheep through the wilderness. Wherever we are, whatever we're going through, Jesus is present, and Jesus shows up, often in unexpected ways. Second thing that hits me is that Jesus, as the Good Shepherd, is ultimately committed to the life of the flock, to protecting the flock from danger, even to the point of his own death. That's the story of Good Friday and of Easter, that God desires for God's people life, even at the cost of Jesus' life. But even that death doesn't have the last word. Easter morning and the empty tomb do. Jesus put down his life, but he also has the power to pick it up again. Jesus does not die for the sake of death, but for the sake of life. So if we're going to lean into the 1 John reading, that too is not about laying one's life down for the sake of death or just because, but laying down life to preserve someone else's life. It isn't about taking unnecessary risks because God will protect me. It's about a risk for the sake of others and for the sake of abundant life for all. In Jesus, in this Good Shepherd, we have a God that is oriented toward life, to preserving it at all costs. And the Good Shepherd's voice will always call us toward life, the life of the flock, and to those who are not yet in the flock. Where do we hear that voice of life from the shepherd? I've had this modern day parable stuck in my head over the last few weeks, months, and it varies a little bit depending on who says it and who retells the parable, but it goes something like this. There was a hurricane coming. A man heard the report on the news. I have faith, God will protect me, and he stayed put. Evacuations were ordered. I have faith, God will protect me, and he stayed put. The storm came and the floodwaters rose and he was hanging out on the roof. A helicopter came. I have faith, God will protect me. Well, the man died in the flood, and as he goes to heaven, he was really mad. And he confronted God and said, "What's the deal? I have faith. Why didn't you protect me?" And God said, "I sent you a weather report, an evacuation order, and a helicopter. What else did you want from me?" I think the point of this parable is that the shepherd's voice is still speaking. And often the shepherd's voice speaks through other people. And part of the life of faith is learning to trust the voice, even if it comes through other people. And we are imperfect at that, and sometimes it's hard to parse out what's the voice of the shepherd and what's not. But I think a key to understanding and to digging into that is that the voice of the shepherd always bends toward life. The shepherd is the one with the rod and the staff that comfort us, that come between us and things that threaten our lives and the lives of the community, the lives of the world. Where do we hear the voice of the shepherd pushing us toward the preservation of life in our communities and in the wider world? In those seeking to end violence against Black and brown bodies so they can experience abundant life? In those working for the preservation of the earth and its resources so that the earth is available and abundant for generations to come? In the medical professionals and scientists who are working to fight COVID and to bring an end to the pandemic? In advice that we get from the medical professionals? I'm sure there are so many other voices in our communities and in the wider world through which we hear the shepherd's voice as well. So today, on this Good Shepherd Sunday, we lean into the promise that Jesus is our good shepherd. Jesus, as our good shepherd, is one that bends toward life, bends toward protection, the shepherd who puts down his life so that we can live. And that is such good and tremendous good news. So as we go forth from this place, we come to the challenge of today. How do we embody that kind of love, that love of the shepherd? How do we bring Jesus with us in the wilderness? How do we recognize Jesus in the wilderness? And where is Jesus calling us to speak the voice of the shepherd that bends toward life? Amen.